At exactly 9:56 in the morning, 300 meters above the dry, cracked brown fields of Zaporizhia, a Ukrainian MiG-29 was cutting through the air at terrifying speed, flying so low that the ground seemed close enough to touch. And this was not a training flight, not a patrol, and definitely not a show of force, because this jet had only one purpose today: a surgical mission designed to remove the brain of a Russian drone network, a hidden command center responsible for launching Shahid kamikaze drones and FPV attackers that had been terrorizing Ukrainian soldiers day and night. And the pilot knew very well that by striking this target he was not just attacking a building. He was kicking a hornet's nest deep inside enemy-controlled airspace, where survival depended on seconds, physics, and nerves of steel. And for the first few minutes everything felt routine. The MiG hugged the terrain, slipping through valleys and low ground to stay below radar coverage. The engine roared steadily, the cockpit instruments glowed calmly, and the pilot's breathing was slow and controlled, because calm is not a luxury in combat, it is a weapon. But then without warning, the calm shattered, because somewhere near Melitopol, an S-400 air defense system woke up and decided that this Ukrainian fighter should not be allowed to exist today. And the sound that filled the pilot's helmet was not just a warning tone. It was a deep, continuous scream, the kind of sound pilots fear more than explosions, because it means the radar has locked on and the missile is already on its way. And in that moment the pilot understood the brutal math of the situation. 190 kilograms of guided death had been launched, accelerating toward him at Mach 2, covering distance so fast that at this range he had maybe 70 to 80 seconds left to live. And there was no room for hesitation, no time for doubt, because hesitation kills pilots faster than missiles. So he reacted instantly, yanking the control stick hard to the right and forcing the MiG into a violent 90-degree turn relative to the radar signal, a maneuver pilots call notching, which is essentially the art of disappearing in plain sight, the aerial equivalent of pretending to be part of the background while moving at 900 kilometers per hour. And as the jet twisted sideways, the pilot released strips of aluminum chaff in rapid bursts, filling the sky behind him with thousands of tiny, reflective pieces that turned his single aircraft into a cloud of identical radar ghosts. And for 8 long seconds that felt like 8 years, he held the maneuver perfectly, sweating inside a suit that felt like it was squeezing the air out of his body, knowing that if he broke the angle even slightly, the missile would find him. And somewhere inside the S-400's computer, Russian algorithms began to panic, unable to tell which return was the real jet and which was just noise. And the missile, now confused and blind, flew toward a calculated intercept point that no longer existed, detonating harmlessly in empty air, raining aluminum fragments and shockwaves into the sky instead of tearing the MiG apart. And the pilot allowed himself a single breath of relief. But relief in modern air warfare is always temporary, because systems like the S-400 do not simply give up. And while the MiG dove lower and leveled out at roughly 150 meters above the ground, racing over fields and roads, the pilot made the mistake that kills even experienced aviators. He underestimated the enemy, because the radar system known as Gravestone is not an old rotating antenna. It is an electronic brain with memory, logic, and patience, capable of remembering your last speed, last heading, and predicting where you are likely to appear next. And while the pilot believed he had vanished, Russian operators quietly changed tactics, activating bistatic radar mode, a clever and deadly trick where the radar transmitter and receiver are separated, meaning that while the pilot hid from the obvious signal blasting from Melitopol, another silent receiver placed 40 kilometers away at a different angle was calmly watching the sky, collecting weak reflections, dirty signals, incomplete data, but enough to rebuild the picture, enough to say, "We have him again." And this time the Russians did not fire another missile, because why chase when you can trap? And instead they shared the MiG's exact position, altitude, and speed through a data link to a Buk M3 system hidden among trees like a predator waiting for prey. And at 10:03, the Buk crew didn't even need to search, because the S-400 had already done the thinking for them, turning the hunt into a mathematical ambush rather than a pursuit. And within seconds, the MiG's cockpit exploded into chaos. Alarms screamed from every direction, warning lights flashed, and the pilot instantly understood the nightmare unfolding, because the Buk wasn't just locking on, it was already firing, and two 9M 317M missiles erupted from their launchers with such violent acceleration that they broke the sound barrier almost immediately. Weapons capable of pulling 30 gs, forces so extreme that even trained pilots would black out and die at nearly half that level, giving the Ukrainian pilot barely 30 seconds to react. And the worst part was the geometry of the trap, because he was boxed in by rocky terrain, with the ground rushing up beneath him and cliffs closing in on both sides. And climbing would expose him to every radar and missile system within 50 kilometers, meaning every possible escape route led directly to death. And the Buk system, unlike older missiles, was being guided continuously from the ground, receiving constant updates, meaning hiding was useless and jamming was pointless. Because these missiles were being babysat all the way to impact, and with no good options left. The pilot played his last card, shoving the throttle forward and pulling back hard on the stick, converting every ounce of speed into altitude, and the MiG shot upward like a rocket, crushing the pilot under 6.5 gs as his body suddenly weighed almost a ton, his anti-G suit inflating violently to keep blood from draining from his brain, his vision collapsing into a narrow gray tunnel. But fainting was not an option, because at 1,400 meters he rolled the aircraft belly up and dumped more chaff, creating a blinding snowstorm for the missiles. And the first missile swallowed the bait, trying to follow the MiG's tight turn but failing to match the rotation, passing so close that the pilot could see its control fins adjusting, missing by barely 100 meters. But the second missile was smarter, predicting where the MiG would be at the end of the maneuver rather than chasing where it was. And the pilot felt it before he saw it, making a desperate decision to push the stick forward, forcing negative GS that sent blood rushing into his head, a horrible sensation that makes your eyes feel like they will burst. But physics once again betrayed the missile, which could not correct its path fast enough, detonating behind him in a cloud of aluminum and air, leaving the MiG alive but barely, because survival had come at a brutal cost. The jet had burned over 250 kilograms of fuel in seconds, and now it was slow, heavy, and exposed, crawling through the sky at just over 300 kilometers per hour, essentially a flying target. While below, the Buk crew calmly reloaded, their cargo vehicle sliding a fresh missile onto the rail with practiced efficiency, and the pilot knew the math was against him, because to release his GBU 39 bombs he needed to climb to 4,500 meters, which would take 90 seconds. But the Russian reload time was only 45, and just as he neared 4,200 meters, two more missiles launched, but this time the Russians made a rare mistake, firing both missiles together instead of spacing them apart, turning two problems into one, and the pilot, showing nerves of ice, flew straight for 12 agonizing seconds, resisting every instinct to dodge, because those seconds were needed for the smart bombs to connect with GPS satellites, without which they would be nothing more than expensive rocks. And at the last possible moment, he flipped the MiG and dove hard, crushing himself under 7 gs. And here physics humiliated technology once more, because missiles traveling at Mach 4 carry enormous inertia, requiring kilometers of space to turn, while the MiG, though slow, could change direction within the space of a soccer field, causing both missiles to scream past into empty sky. And just as the pilot leveled out at 2,400 meters, checking his fuel gauge and silently praying, another nightmare appeared, because his warning receiver lit up again, announcing the radar of a Russian Su-35S fighter closing fast from 85 kilometers away, guided by the same integrated defense network, turning this mission into a coordinated hunt. And the Su-35 saw the MiG as a weak, glowing dot on its Urbisi radar, crawling at barely 500 kilometers per hour, while the Russian fighter surged forward at nearly double that speed, locking on from 60 kilometers and preparing to fire an R-77 missile, a weapon famous for its unusual rear grille fins that allow extreme maneuverability. And the Ukrainian pilot now faced an impossible equation, because maneuvering would drain his remaining fuel and doom him over enemy territory, while flying straight would make him an easy kill. And when the R-77 launched, accelerating to Mach 4 with its own active radar, impact time ticking down at 47 seconds, the pilot waited until the very last moment, and then did something no sane manual would ever recommend, aggressively raising the nose to an absurd angle, bleeding speed until the MiG practically stalled in midair, then kicking the rudder fully, forcing the aircraft into a dirty, desperate Cobra maneuver. And for a split second the jet seemed to hang in the sky like a frozen sculpture, confusing the missile's computer which was programmed to intercept flying targets, not hovering impossibilities, causing the R-77 to lose its solution and pass by harmlessly, detonating behind him, shocking even the Russian pilot. But the maneuver left the MiG falling like a brick, regaining control only at 1,500 meters, empty, exhausted, but alive, and the Su-35, low on fuel, was forced to disengage, proving once again that logistics often decide battles more than skill. And with only 90 kilograms of fuel left, engines coughing and instruments dying, the Ukrainian pilot made his final choice, because 8 kilometers ahead lay the true objective, a former school building turned drone command hub, and with one last push of the throttle, sacrificing the final drops of fuel for altitude, he climbed just enough to get the firing solution, released 2 GBU-39 bombs, and turned away, becoming a silent glider as the bombs spread their wings and sailed forward, guided by GPS, piercing concrete, detonating inside rooms filled with screens, antennas, lithium batteries, and drone warheads, igniting a massive chain reaction that erased the heart of the drone operation in a pillar of fire visible for kilometers. And at 10:17, with systems dead and engines silent, the MiG rolled to a stop on the runway, battered, leaking, but victorious, as the pilot opened the canopy and breathed cold air, knowing that for today at least, Russian drones would not fly. Mission complete, message delivered.